Guess what happened today?
What's that?
First day of third grade for my daughter.
Okay.
The day that every parent dreads their whole life.
She's pregnant.
No. She comes home with a little permission slip, and it says, "We need $8 for your daughter's recorder." She's starting the recorder. Hot crust buns are just going to be crushed in my hallways for the next 6 months.
Yeah, we went through that phase, and then it went to violin, and I think that was 10 times as bad. But then we got to piano, and it's hard to make a really bad sound out of a piano. So I highly recommend.
That's true. She's already doing piano, but just the recorder, I remember the bad sounds that it makes, and I can't even, like, it's giving me anxiety thinking about it right now.
Welcome to Drunk Real Estate.
Grab a drink and enjoy the show.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 14 of Drunk Real Estate. I am Kyle Wilson, more affectionately known as Ashley Wilson's husband. Once again, I'm joined by the three exact same guests I always have. Just kidding. We have Kathy Fettke joining us. How's it going, Kathy?
Good. I dressed for the occasion. I've got, I'm not going to have a drunk real estate show and not have my nightclub attire on and my disco lights.
Well, I'm ready for a party. What are you drinking over there?
I was going to pour myself a whiskey, but it's like 4:00 in the afternoon here. So it's just wine. It's probably like 3-day-old wine, but hey, I'm drinking it.
Just a random bottle.
Just...
I actually thought about driving to Malibu to do this in person with Kathy, and then I'm like, I'm gonna get schnockered and then I have to drive back an hour and a half. That's probably not a good idea.
I don't know. That couch in the background looks pretty comfy, Marisa. You could have just slept it off there, and then
I could have.
So, Kathy, for those who don't know who you are, if there's anyone out there who doesn't know the awesome, amazing Kathy Fettke, tell us a little about yourself.
Well, I am the founder and co-CEO of Real Wealth. We've been helping investors buy 1 to 4 unit properties nationwide and in areas that make sense. I'm from California, and it doesn't make sense here. It's really hard. I still have people ask me, where can I buy an investment property in California? And there's probably some areas, but you could just do so much better elsewhere. But it's hard. So we have teams set up in locations like Dallas and all over Florida, in the Midwest, with property management in place and teams in place to make that whole process easy. So that's Real Wealth. I also have a podcast called The Real Wealth Show, and I'm on Bigger Pockets on the Market.
Shh, we don't talk about them. They're a competitor.
Oh,
I'm kidding.
Isn't every podcast a competitor?
That's true.
No one can mention their podcasts on here. AJ would be in trouble.
So this is where I saw, Jay was on the podcast and that other podcast, and he's like, how do you introduce yourself? And Jay's like, I'm a Bigger Pockets OG. How about that?
Definitely. And I'm the NG. What I said, the new gangster.
I don't know if you get some title for how many books you've published with Bigger Pockets, but Jay's got to be up there with the top of them.
Yeah.
I think Brandon might have me beat, but it's close.
And I've got one coming. Rich and I are writing a book.
What is it?
It's on scaling, how to scale, but in a way that you don't go broke and you don't, which is a great topic for today, because we're seeing a lot of companies that, they went big and hard in the last couple of years, and they're crashing and burning, as you guys know.
Love it. When's the book coming out, Kathy?
Next year, but we have to have the manuscript in by December. So a chapter a week. Woo!
That's awesome.
And we all know that books get in on time every time.
Oh, you know what? My husband he will make it happen. He is so structured. He'll be up at 4 a.m. and write until 6 a.m. and I'll be there next to him. We'll make it happen.
Yeah, my wife's writing a book too, and she's already missed 4 deadlines. I think she's 4 for 4. So, Jay, how's it going over there?
Good. Should I introduce myself?
No, I think people have heard enough from you over the last 14 episodes. How's it going? You having a good time?
Everything's going good. I'm happy. My kids are back in school and life is good. We survived the hurricane last week. And yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm drinking again. Do you want to know what I'm drinking?
I absolutely want to know what you're drinking. I'm glued to the TV.
Yeah, so I am drinking a cab called Precision from Napa Valley 2020.
Oh no, that stuff is garbage. That stuff is garbage. You can't drink that.
So I was about to say something. So my wife was at Costco today, and
Oh my God, is it Costco wine?
I told you. I told you.
They do have some really good wine, I will say. As a California girl raised near Napa, you can get some good wines there.
But Carol saw this. Apparently, it's like a normally $35 bottle that was like $18. So she picked it up, and as Mauricio pointed out, not my favorite wine ever. A little bit sweet, not a great aftertaste, or at least for a cab. And yeah,
Just text me next time.
Maybe my 3-day-old wine is better than yours. I don't know.
yeah, it probably is.
What's going on, Kathy? That's just not acceptable to be drinking wine 3 days.
I know it's not, but it was sitting there. I didn't want to open up a new bottle. I don't really drink at 4:00, generally speaking. So
This is late for us. You sometimes do it a little bit early, and it's good. We won't be done till 7:30. So by then.
She's gonna work her way down. She's got the 1-day-old wine right after that.
yeah.
Mauricio, how's it going, man?
Dude, it's going good. I am pumped. I'm pumped about this episode. I'm so glad to have Kathy on the show. And I am drinking one of my, I'm a big Belle Gloss fan. And they came up with this rosé that I started drinking yesterday at the pool for Labor Day. It's the Oil de Perdue, whatever it's called. But it's like light and fluffy and, whatever. But good stuff. Good stuff. And by the way, I also want to say that you guys looked like you were bickering big time before the show, but it sounds like you guys have made up and you're not angry anymore and you guys are loving. Everything good?
We did make up, yeah. Well, Jay, this isn't the first time Jay's done this. It's been multiple times where we set topics a few days in advance, and then I go off and I research the topic so I'm prepared. And then it'll be like the morning of, or in the one case, it was 10 minutes before. Jay's like, "Hey, I'm changing my topic." And I'm like, no, that's like, it's not your topic. It's the show topic. You're just introing it. You can't change it that early. And so he kind of tried to pull that again here, but we figured it out. We're okay.
And somehow you try to drag Kathy and I into this bickering discussion of married couples. And I was having no part of that. So I just wanted to make sure you guys were good.
It was a group discussion. I thought you guys would back me up. You didn't want to change it.
I mean, the crux of the argument was I wanted to make the show better, and Kyle just wanted to stick with the plan no matter how much it sucked.
We have to stick to the program because even if I switch up the order of you guys' intro, all hell breaks loose. So we have to stick to a regimen here.
That's true. All right, buddy. Kyle, what are you drinking?
I'm going back to I got some Calumet small batch. Going straight bourbon again. So I got to hold down the fort somehow with you guys for the liquor drinkers out there. Oh, cheers.
There's more, by the way, there's more liquor being consumed in this podcast episode than ever before.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. Cause AJ, you said liquor to use, which was very specific, but alcohol. So yes, the most alcohol has ever been consumed. Well, cheers everyone.
Cheers. Cheers. And here's something to look out for today. I've had a couple people point out that Kyle at about the 1 hour mark or so, maybe a little bit later,
start slurring.
He plays with his hat. He turns his hat a little bit crooked. His eyes get a little bit glossed over, and he starts slurring a little bit. Basically, there's this switch that flips where he goes from sober to not so sober, and it's somewhere around the hour 5 mark. So let's watch it.
Well, I got the backwards hat and I got the headrest, and you guys just make me tired, so I try and lean my head back, and it gets weird.
So if you see that, make sure you comment and the timestamp that when it happens today, because that'll be fun.
Oh, it'll be a game. I'll do a different time every time. All right, let's get into some real news here. So last week we talked about Jay Powell's speech, and now we said we're navigating by the stars under cloudy skies, which got me thinking, why are we navigating by the stars? It's 2023 right now. We're using jobs data that's collected by surveys. They're having to do massive revisions every single time months later that they kind of just sneak in after the fact. And we're using inflation data that's sometimes up to a year delayed. So we know there's better resources out there for jobs. We know there's different ways to calculate inflation. So why are we using all these late lagging indicators? So Jay, why don't you catch us up on some of these better indicators we could be using and what they are telling us?
Yeah, so let's start with the big takeaway here, because I hear this a lot. A lot of people saying the government's lying to us. They're giving us this bad data.
They are.
And so let's be clear. I haven't ruled it out, but I think that more so than just the government wanting to lie, because while I think there probably is some deception going on, and there has been for a long time, I think more than that, I think it really boils down to the fact that the government often uses metrics and methodologies that don't really tell us the whole story, or maybe they tell us the whole story, but they're not really the appropriate measures for what they're trying to, for the story they're trying to tell.
They're old and slow. They're old and slow.
They are old and slow.
Or as my friend used to say, these stats are like bikinis. They show a lot, but they don't tell the whole story.
And it's true, but here's the problem. They're the ones that make the headlines. So they're the ones that 90, 95, 99% of Americans who don't really follow this stuff, it's what they're hearing, because they don't dig in any further. And so I want this segment to be a little bit about what are some of the other sources of information out there, and how do they relate to what the government's telling us in terms of whether the government is, again, being deceptive or just out of touch or whatever it is. And so I think the big one, and the one everybody comes up to me all the time and says, is inflation. So is that CPI number a real thing? Because everybody seems to think CPI feels higher than what the government's reporting. And again, the government's right now saying about 3% inflation, historically about 2.5% inflation. And most people seem to believe that in their daily lives, they feel like the inflation is just much higher than that. Not just recently, but going back a long time. And so a little bit of history here. So it was back in the 90s that CPI, after being used for a couple decades, a bunch of politicians got together and basically said, we're going to fudge CPI. And they did this on purpose. This was true deception by the government. But the goal wasn't to deceive Americans specifically. The goal was to reduce inflation, or make it look like inflation was less than it was, so that they could peg the cost of living to a lower number. They knew that Social Security and other federal programs basically had to pay out increases every year based on cost of living. If we had high inflation, then those cost of living increases would go up faster, and it would eat into the federal budget and the federal deficit even more. And so they basically said, let's redefine CPI and have it come in a little bit lower so that we don't have to increase our cost of living raises as quickly.
And by the way, and Jay, just to give you an example of that, like one of the classic examples that I love to point out is like for example, when the price of beef starts going up, then they make the assumption like, hey, when beef prices go up high, then we're going to assume that people are going to switch to chicken, and therefore chicken is cheaper, and so we're going to start counting chicken more, which causes the CPI basket to go down. So it's little tricks like that they just keep messing around and putting in a lot of assumptions into the CPI, so it's not a straight, mathematical equation.
100%. And that's actually the big one that they use. It's this thing called substitution, and exact example that you used, where basically the way they calculate inflation is they say, here's a whole what they call basket of goods that we have to buy. And have they gotten more expensive or less expensive month after month after month? But at some point, the government said, well, instead of seeing if steak has gotten, or chicken or hamburger has gotten more expensive, because that's the one they've been using for the past 10, 20 years, now we're going to say, well, because things have gotten so expensive, people are going from steak and they're going to start eating more hamburger. So instead of checking out to see if steak has gotten more expensive, let's just substitute hamburger into that basket of goods, which obviously hamburger costs less than steak. And now inflation looks like it's gone down. So that's actually been the big one, or the big way that the government has kind of deceived us about CPI. They've done some other things over the years, but that's the big one that they've been doing. Now, there's a site called Shadow Stats, and started by a guy named John Williams, who was an economics guy. And about 30 years ago, he started publishing data around CPI that was true to the original definition of CPI, which is a fixed basket of goods. And so if you go to shadowstats.com, I think you can get a subscription, you can pay for it. But they even have some.
What's our referral fee for that? We get a big referral fee for that, right?
I do not use J. Scott 1. No.
Jay gets a free blue Gatorade from the corner store.
There you go. No, I've actually never used it, except I've used the free charts, and typically what they show is that. I said show. I had a 12th grade English teacher who said the word show as a verb should never be used. There's always a better word. So I'm gonna change that. So what it demonstrates
Illustrates. Oh, sorry.
what it illustrates or demonstrates is that historically, or at least over the last 30 years, CPI tends to be about 2 to 3 points lower than the original definition of CPI or inflation, which was a fixed basket of goods. So going by that measure, if the government's saying that inflation's somewhere around 3.3% right now, it's probably close to 6 or 7 or maybe even 8%. Now, not only is that a huge difference, but if you think about the fact that wages are growing this year at about 4.3%, which means if inflation were 4.3%, people would be making the same amount of money relative to last year. Well, the government's claiming that inflation's at 3.3%, wages are growing at 4.3%. Yay, people are making more money. But the reality is, if inflation's really at 6, 7, 8%, people are losing spending power. And if people have been losing spending power for the last 30 years, I mean, that explains a lot about what's going on.
This is what I'm talking about, though, where you can kind of just like pick and choose which inflation stats you want to use. Because I was shout out to JP Conklin. He's my favorite nerd podcast, the Rate Guy podcast, where he just talks about interest rates and stuff. But I was listening to him the other day, and he did an awesome segment on the Penn State Alternative Inflation Index. And so basically, back in 2017, this professor from Penn State was like, "Why are we using this CPI PCE index that has all of this super lagging data, and most of all, shelter? We all know that shelter, we're in real estate, like some of this stuff, like leases only turn over in 1 year. So like some of this data is a year old. And yet we're using that as like the indicator data driven resource for whether or not we should be raising rates. So back in 2017, this professor from Penn State said, I'm going to fix this. And so he did a whole thing where he created this whole new index, and it basically accounts for the lagging indicator of shelter. And it wipes that out. It takes it. He has his own indicator of what the current shelter component is. And if you look at it, so you can go to, I'll just say the website here. If you go to psu.edu/inflation or sites.psu.edu/inflation, it has a whole thing on the Penn State Alternative Inflation Index. I'm sure he never had any idea it would be this important. But it if you go back, and instead of having these lagging like effects when you raise interest rates, you actually see it happens more immediate, and it works both ways. So during economic expansion, it actually shows that inflation is understated, and during economic slowdowns, it shows that inflation is overstated. So right now, according to this index, it's severely overstated. So if you actually look at the CPI, it actually has CPI negative. It went negative in March for CPI. Now, most people say, okay, we don't really care about CPI. The Fed really cares about core PCE. Well, it does core PCE too. And core PCE just actually went below 2% for the first time in June. It just, after the last reading, it ticked back up, just like every other inflation reading that just happened because of the way that year over year works. But if you go by these indicators, and I read through the whole paper, I like it a lot better than what we're using right now. Then we're already, even by core PCE, we're already at our target 2%.
Well, the funny thing is that back in 1995, and I'd say I'm old enough to remember this, and I probably am, but I don't remember it. But doing some research, what I saw was Alan Greenspan testified in front of Congress back in 95 on this very topic, and basically made the assertion that CPI was overstating inflation. Inflation was actually lower, exactly what you just said. And apparently, like a bunch of people, including Newt Gingrich, basically like they blasted him for it. Like just basically made fun of him for even suggesting that that inflation was lower than what CPI was indicating.
Yeah, and look, my biggest beef with all these things that I think people equate. For example, people equate all these indices with the actual inflation number, and I just keep them separate. I mean, a lot of these indices have so many, like you said, the substitution method. Every single one of these has some element of a human element that goes into the model that, depending on how you manipulate that number or change that number or are wrong with that number, will change the actual statistics. And so I don't, CPI is supposed to measure inflation, but to me, it's not inflation. It's just an index. It's a consumer price index, and the index may go up and down, but that doesn't necessarily mean really it's a really good reflection of of what's going on. I mean, the classic example, and Kyle, you've been talking about this for a while. Let me share the screen real quick. But you've been talking about inflation. But if we look at just the unemployment numbers, right, that have been coming out lately. I mean, this is the revisions that these unemployment numbers have happened since the beginning of the year. Like, if you add up all of the jobs that they didn't reflect from when they came out, we're down 355,000 jobs. I mean, this tells you that whenever they come up with these statistics, there's a lot of guesswork going on, I guess, and there's a lot of revisions going up. Specifically, if you look at a couple months ago, remember we talked about this one on the podcast, but they came out with saying that we'd gained 209,000 jobs. I remember, Jay, you and I were talking about how this means the economy is doing just great. And then it turns out that we actually had 105,000, or we had 104,000 less. And so the number was 105. And I can only imagine what our podcast would have been, or the headlines would have been, if that was the actual number that came out. And the reason for that is because they have all these assumptions that are built into that model. And if those assumptions are incorrect, and I think one of them, the ones with unemployment, for example, is just the trend. Like, they have a trend line that's in there that they take into account. And if they get that wrong, which clearly they have been, then I don't know if this is on purpose or not, but they keep screwing this one up, and it just makes these numbers unreliable. That's my ultimate point here that I want to make, and then I'll give it back to you guys, is that it's really hard to rely on CPI, really hard to rely on these unemployment numbers if you're trying to get an accurate picture of what's going on today in the economy, and then making investment decisions, real estate decisions, or what have you, because these are just not reliable numbers. And you don't realize this until 6 months or a year down the line, when you're looking back and you realize that whatever decisions you were making, if you're making them based on these stats, then you're just in a world of hurt.
Well, I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory or not, but the author of the book Fed Up, I don't know if you've looked at that, but we got to interview her on the market, and she said that right now what she believes she used to work for the Fed, and she said what she thinks Jay Powell is trying to do is undo what they figured out doesn't work, which is all this quantitative easing and money, increase in money supply. Like, they got slapped in the face, didn't work, and he's unwinding it. And the only way to unwind it is to have this kind of jobs data. So anyway, that was kind of an interesting perspective. And I don't know if it's true or not, but he has been able to accomplish something that maybe others haven't.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at the common sense behind it, it may or may not tell the whole story. I mean, if you look at jobs, basically the government has revised jobs data every month so far this year through July. Now, you could say, sure, they're always going to have to revise the data, but statistically, shouldn't it be just as likely to revise it up as it is down? And they've revised it down
every single time.
Every single time. Now, the argument that a lot of economists would make is that data is likely to be off in a particular direction based on, as Mauricio was saying, the trend. Depending on how the economy is trending, it's more likely the data is going to be off in a certain direction. And the fact that it's been off 7 months on the high side is not unexpected. Personally, I think it probably is unexpected. But just to get back into the data a little bit, one, we've had 7 months in a row, every month this year so far, of revised data. But here's the important thing. In July, they revised it from 187 down to 157 non-farm payroll jobs. But the big one that they just came out with last week, the big revision, was in June, where originally they had said 185,000 non-farm payroll jobs were created, which was a decent number, not huge, but decent. Everybody kind of celebrated because it was still relatively strong. They revised that number down to 105,000. 105,000, had they announced that in June instead of the 185, had they said the real number, or the number that they're now saying 105 in June, instead of everybody celebrating, in actuality, that was the weakest number since December 2020. So the headline in June was everything is great. And then they do this revision. Nobody really talks about it, when in reality, the headline would have been, if they had come up with the right number, the headline would have been, this is the weakest jobs report we've seen in 3 years.
And what's fascinating is that, obviously the Fed is a quasi-independent, but I'm surprised that they haven't come out and sort of really pointed this out, right? Because they're trying to get these unemployment numbers up, right? That's their goal. That's their stated goal, is to get unemployment higher. Well, they could sort of show through these revisions that they're actually getting in that direction. They're actually succeeding in that. Instead, they're not really talking about it, other than just saying it's really been hard. It's been sticky. They've been trying to get this unemployment number higher because they believe that's going to lower inflation. And in fact, it's just been sticky. And their words, not mine.
Yeah, but then their last speech, they basically came out and said they have no idea what they're doing. Like that's what I took it away from it, is that they're in uncharted waters right now. and they're basically flying by the seat of their pants, and they're kind of admitting to it now. And yes, their base case is that, okay, this is no recession, but they still are caveating it heavily. Like, that's just our base case. Like, we very well could have a small recession, and we're doing our best. So I don't know how you trust anything at this point from them.
I was lucky enough to interview Dave Duncan just last week. He's the chief economist of Fannie Mae. And, he does believe that we'll run into a mild recession next year. But again, he said mild. And, a lot of people are in a recession right now. People in different industries, especially those who are dependent on interest rates and they're on adjustable rates and it's changing. So businesses that have seen their interest rate double, triple over the last year, they're feeling a recession right now. And obviously people in the apartment industry, that they're feeling it. So it's not like everybody's thriving right now, but a lot of people are. But a general recession, yeah, he's expecting that next year. But given that there's still so many job openings, he doesn't really think it's going to be that bad. So that's at least good news. Yeah.
Oh, don't get me started with the job openings jolt survey. But Jay, we're talking about recession. Didn't they revise the GDP as well down a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's the other one. So not just jobs, but originally they came out with, and again, I hate defending the government, but I mean, you like to give them the benefit of the doubt, but with all these revisions in the wrong direction, it's hard to give them the benefit of the doubt. But they came out with a preliminary, kind of what they don't refer to it as, but it's basically a first draft number on GDP last month. And they said GDP was 2.4% in Q2. So growth of 2.4% of the economy in Q2, which again was a good 0.3% higher than what was expected. And everybody celebrated, hey, everything's going great. And then last week, a revision came out and actually was 2.1%, which again, not a bad number. For 2%, everything's good. But that would have completely changed the headline. And that's all anybody remembers is the headline. Nobody's following the revisions. And so if it's a misinformation campaign, if the point of this is basically to make a big headline splash and then quietly roll out the truth, they're successful. And again, I hate to think that might be the case, but it's hard to argue with the data looking like that's the case.
Fair enough. Should we move on then? I don't think we're solving anything.
Let's move on.
All right, let's talk about some housing, since this is a real estate podcast, and with housing pricing not falling like everyone had hoped, and mortgage costs at record highs, more and more people are finding themselves renting these days. And as more people move to the suburbs during COVID and demand for rentals outside of the city skyrocketed, not just apartment rentals are skyrocketing. So we're looking for the demand of single family houses are taking off a little bit. And that's created this little niche of build to rent. It was kind of a little subset back in the day pre-COVID, but since COVID, it's become its full-blown own little market, to the point where Yardi Matrix and all the major data research firms are talking about it and how it's performing. So now it's getting major news, to the point where it's getting major news when ABC, NBC is saying things like, oh, there's these BTR big conglomerates, they're killing the American dream. But Kathy, do you think these communities are here to stay, or are they just filling in a temporary hole that's been created by high prices and high interest rates?
Well, the real issue is that we have a growing population, at least of people forming households. So you've got this bubble of millennials ages 29 to 34. When you look at the demographic chart, it's just like this bubble of people at this age. And that's why it seems like I'm always going to baby showers these days, because there's so many people at that age that are, again, getting married, having babies. Millennials are people too. There was a lot of talk that they're not going to get married and they're not going to act like generations before them, but they were just young and now they're of age. So, you've got all these people, the largest generation in history and currently today, and with the biggest chunk of them at household formation age, at a time when builders really slowed down over the last decade, since 2008, when home builders just absolutely got wiped out. from the Great Recession when you could buy a foreclosure for, a tenth of the price of a new home. Like they just, besides the fact that they just went belly up anyway, but it made no financial sense to bring on new inventory when the market was flooded with foreclosures and cheap ones at a time when that generation that was forming households was Gen X, a much, much smaller uh, generation. So we had about 4 million homes on the market and a tiny group of people who wanted them. So it was, here we are. So builders took their time. They were being very conservative. They were building to suit, basically not investing so much in the big subdivisions and not really planning for this next generation of millennials that was going to be the opposite. So here we are. It makes no sense for people to ever compare right now with 2008 because the opposite is true today, where we have about a third or a fourth of the housing inventory on the market that we had back then, if not less, but far more people who want those homes. Very, very different scenario. New listings are down because why would anyone put their house on the market? The people who've bought homes in the last decade have put money down. They have the highest FICO scores. They have equity because those home prices have gone up. They have the lowest mortgage payment in history compared to income homeowners. So they're not putting their homes on the market. They're not going to trade their 2% mortgage for a 7% or 8% mortgage for a house twice the price or 3 times the price of the one they're living in. So the housing market is stuck. And the only way to bring on new inventory for this group of millennials that would like to live somewhere is to bring on new supply. So that is partly why Warren Buffett just invested nearly $1 trillion into home builders, including D.R. Horton, one of the more affordable house builders. I think they got the bulk of the money. I forget how much. I had it written in my notes somewhere, but like $700 million that Warren Buffett invested in D.R. Horton to bring on new supply. So fortunately for me, this is an area that our company's been investing in, is single family homes and new developments. We started buying land back in 2010 when it was 10 cents on the dollar. And we're doing it. We've got a build to rent project right now in just over the border of Texas, where there's so much growth and just not enough supply. So is it here to stay? Yeah, it's probably here to stay until there's enough.
So when we hear the term build to rent, what does that mean? Does that mean that, or maybe it means multiple things, but does it mean that your company builds and then you rent out and you manage, or you sell them to one big buyer who buys lots of them and then rents it out like an apartment complex, or do you sell them off individually to landlords who then rent them out individually? Like what does that mean specifically in terms of business model?
On our current fund, we have just negotiated with a builder that we are buying all his inventory, and he's building fourplexes. So it's not like the big hedge funds and the institutionals that are buying large plots of land and basically building horizontal apartments. That's what they've been doing for a while, and they're kind of catering to the family that would like to have a yard. And really during COVID, that certainly took off because
Are these like moving up families, or are these people who are staying for a while? Like, is it one of those, like, apartment complexes? You're saying you're hoping people stay for two years on average, but usually they're transitioning, they're moving somewhere else. Are you getting, and your traditional single family houses that is just in your neighborhoods full of other people who aren't renting, or owners, you get much higher numbers. You're getting people stay for 4 or 5 years. Are these targeting those people who are, kind of on their way from apartments moving up to home ownership? Or are you seeing like people get in these spots and actually just stick around because they like it?
Well, I think the biggest issue, not the biggest, but a huge issue in America is lack of affordable housing. And people can live in apartments or they can rent a home, and generally renting a home was more expensive than renting an apartment. So it really comes to financials, right? I think everybody's dream is to actually own a home, but not everybody can do that. So their choices are to rent, but what are they going to rent? And it's got to be something near their work. Generally, not always. They might want to be near a good school. So, people are priced out. There's 25 million people who were priced out of the market, and it's higher now that rates went up. But as soon as rates went up, 25 million people had to figure out a place to live that they probably couldn't own. They have to rent. So for them, if you've got dogs and you've got children, it's easier to live in a home, right? You've got a place where the dogs can go out and do their business and kids can play. So, will they stay longer? They'll stay until somehow they're in a position to be able to own a home, and when will that be?
I was just going to say, what do you see as, so, I mean, we saw after 2008 that, like, people were talking about the American dream is dead and millennials aren't going to be buying homes. And for many years, they didn't. I mean, basically home ownership, I mean, it's always stayed in kind of that 62 to 66% range. It didn't really drop below that, but it dropped to the bottom of the range, and a lot of younger people were not buying. But then 2014, 15, 16, 17 came around, and kids started buying. I sound old by saying that, but millennials started buying at crazy rates. So, I mean, what is your viewpoint? What's your forecast on where home ownership rates are going to head over the next 5 or 10 years? Do you think more of the next generation is going to be buying? Or, yeah, I mean, Kyle's pointing downward. And that kind of aligns with my thinking as well, is that we're going to see home ownership rate like just dropping.
It might, but I'm in the camp that next year we will see this recession. That Doug Duncan, who I interviewed at Freddie Mac, he's won an award for his most accurate forecasting. So I do really believe him that we could get to a point where we have a recession, and usually you see mortgage rates come down during a recession. So I'm actually in the camp that we will see rates go down at some point, probably Q1, Q2 of next year. And when that happens, then millions more people are back in the market. Every time interest rates go down just a little bit, there's a little bit more people that can afford.
Yeah, but to Mauricio's point that he always makes on this is that the reason most likely why they're going to be cutting rates is because we have some sort of downturn or something bad happens. And so that could possibly offset that. All of a sudden, yes, rates are down, but now people have lost their jobs. No one has any money. We're having to, fire sell houses because they can't afford them anymore. So that's just because rates come down. Like that's, if we get our base case soft landing and hey, okay, we're at 5% now and we're just going to slowly bring it back down to 3 and everything's going to be great, then yeah, sure, the housing market's going to take off. And I think Barbara Corcoran basically said that the other day, where she was on one of those NBC.
She copied me. She's listening to my stuff.
Yeah, and she basically said that the moment rates, there's so many people sitting just ready to pounce, and they're going to buy. But that, to me, that's assuming that the reason that they're lowering rates isn't for a bad reason.
Well, we have a lot of reshoring happening. I'm a little more positive about what's coming. I don't think there's a housing market crash even possible based on the things that I just said. You've got people homeowners today are in the best position they've ever been in. They're locked into low rates. 90% of the people who own homes today are under 6%, with a majority of them under 4%, and many in 3% and 2% rates. Their home payment is far lower than rent. So no one needs to worry about today's homeowners. The housing market is solid. And if they lose their job, they're going to lose their house and go rent for something that's smaller but costs more. Like, we didn't have the technology that we have today, where if you're in trouble, you put your home, you rent a room out, and there's so much demand now for housing that, if you really just need a few more bucks, you just do what I did when I was facing tough times, and we rented out rooms. So I'm not worried at all about a housing crash. That what I'm worried about is enough housing. And when you have supply demand issues like we have more demand than we have supply, it just can't happen. It just can't happen. There's enough people who can afford to buy. Not everyone can buy, and a lot of people can't, but there's enough who can. And every time that rates come down, those people who can, they jump in, and they jump in fast. And we've seen it every time that rent rates have come down even just a little bit. And I mean mortgage rates, not the Fed rate.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask you, Kathy, but you kind of probably just answered it there. But that's one of my, not pushbacks, but just something I keep asking the guys on the show, and I'm tired of listening to these jokers, so I figured I'd ask you the same question. But yes, to your point, inventory's low. Why would you give up a 2 or 3% mortgage right now and have to switch it for a 7%? I mean, that makes no sense. 90% of people, as you mentioned, have less than 6%. But it's just a question I have. I'm just trying to kind of ask the question, and that is, if there is a recession, and let's just say there's more than a mild recession. Let's just say Dr. Duncan's a little off and it's not a mild recession, but it's a significant recession. It doesn't have to be crazy, but Now you have unemployment rate, which is what the Fed's trying to increase. A lot of people lose their jobs, and a lot of people. One of my theses is a lot of people will be forced to sell their home because, yes, they may have equity. That's great. But, if you're unemployed, you can't get or you can't refinance. You can't get a home line of a HELOC on that. And so if there is a major recession, is that going to force people to have to put their houses in the inventory and sell their houses? And the question I had really was, is that a significant enough number to make an impact? Although it sounds like you're Kathy, you're mentioning, hey, people are resourceful. Maybe they start renting out rooms or putting some ADU units on their property or being creative.
That's also one of the things I liked about this, the build to rent.
Wait, that question was for Kathy. I've already heard your
I just want to say that this is going to sound terrible, and I don't mean to be harsh to anyone, but the best thing that could happen to the housing market is more inventory coming on. So people losing their homes, it would be a great thing for the housing market. It means that those who can't afford lose it, those who can get it. And all these stories that, oh my gosh, there's going to be all these short-term rentals that go on the market. I'm like, yes, bring them, because we need it. We need inventory. So, I'm just not worried. There's not enough and people need it. It's not like one of those things where you're like, maybe I should have a place to live. Like, you need a place to live,
Well, one of the arguments that all these talking heads are talking about is how the build to rent is stealing inventory basically away from people who want to buy new houses. And I'm like, it's doing the opposite. These houses wouldn't get built. You can't make the numbers work right now building a house for somebody to just live in. You can only do like luxury houses. You can't do affordable houses and make the numbers work. And so at least when you're doing build to rent, at least these houses are getting built. And just like I always do, whenever something seems too good to be true with this build to rent, I'm like, okay, I got to go find problems with this. And it was difficult to find problems. It was right now seems like kind of the perfect storm for build to rent to kind of thrive. The only issues I could kind of find with it is you just got to be flexible with your business plan, right? Like it's more difficult to predict where this is going because it's such a new segment. It's not like, apartments where we have 50 years worth of data to figure out what's going on. This is a new segment, but the flexibility is what is so great about this, in that if you, let's say, just like the government always does, they're going to step in at some point for this affordability. And so let's say they do some very aggressive program to encourage home ownership and give, tax credits and super low interest rates and yada, yada, yada. And we have this huge home ownership boom. Well, the thing about build to rent that's got over apartments is you could sell to people just to live in these places. Like someone can buy this on a, even a fourplex, someone can buy with a traditional mortgage. They don't need a commercial mortgage to get in this. So you have that flexibility of being able to pivot your business strategy there. But it's you have to make sure, if you're investing with someone, you have to make sure you're really vetting the person you're investing with and know that they have the ability to recognize, okay, when there's a need of a business plan change here, that they're going to be able to pull it off for you.
I mean, that is what's fun. There's some multiple exit strategies for build to rent. You can't just kind of slice up an apartment and, sell it off in pieces. So that does allow some flexibility. But just like anything, just like everything, it's supply and demand. So if you're building too many of them all in one area and the growth isn't there, it's not going to be a great investment. It's not going to work out. And that's the same for apartments. There are some areas, and I don't know specifically where, I've just heard rumors that there's certain areas where there's a bit of overbuilding happening in apartments. And, how will that affect other apartments? And again, that's good for there's positives and negatives. That's great for the tenant, right? Because if there's a lot of vacancies, they get a better deal.
So for anybody out there that is looking to get into build to rent, and I know there are a lot of people that love the space and it's a great space. And I know all real estate's local, but if you could talk in generalities, every asset class is someplace on that curve of expansion or recession. And so where is BTR right now? Is it still a good time to get in, or have we passed the peak and now it's things are slowing down? Where do you see BTR like on that supply demand curve?
It's funny. I not funny. This isn't funny. But I have had some build to rent owners now fire selling. And I think it has to do with their loan structure. So no matter how good the business is that you're in, when your interest rate just doubled or tripled, the numbers don't work. So I think that's what we're seeing, because we also, as you know, at Real Wealth, just sell properties individually. So we've got people who are planning on doing a build to rent situation, but now it's just not working, because the loan that they're not done. So they have to refi into a loan that, the numbers don't work anymore. So we'll see. Is it needed? Yes. Do people want it? Sure. They want an affordable place to live that's near their work. But does it work financially, for a lot of people with these high interest rates for the investor? Maybe not.
Sure. Well, I guess the good thing, as I said about this though, is you do have options, right? Like it's not like you just have to stick to a business plan, and if that business plan doesn't work, then you're out of luck. Like even those people who planned on refining into longer term, maybe they do have to pivot and sell. And luckily, selling right now isn't a bad thing. We haven't seen that downturn in housing prices, and they should still work out. Versus, as you alluded to, some of these, commercial spaces, office spaces, apartment spaces, you kind of have one business plan, and if interest rates crush that business plan, you're up a creek, and there's not much you can do.
Yeah.
Fair. Should we move on and talk about Zillow?
Zillow.
So shout out to the Zillow marketing team, because the news of their new 1% down payment loan program was everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. And so I was shocked when I finally read it, and it was like, oh, this is only in Arizona. But the idea of making housing more affordable is obvious and enticing, but it's also concerning when many people still think we're possibly on the verge of recession. So when we read into this actual loan program, it makes it seem like it isn't quite as big a deal as the news outlets are making it out to be. So Mauricio, should we really care about this, or is this kind of just a media hype thing?
No, it's great. I mean, you're right. I mean, the marketing, the ads these guys have gotten, even if they lose their shirts like they did in the other one, it's probably just worth it from all the marketing they're getting. But look, I do have a confession to make. I really thought that when I saw this, my first inclination was, you know what? Zillow got into that business of buying and selling single family homes, and it was a kind of business model that they thought they were just going to make $1 bazillion. That was a complete flop. They just lost their shirt on that, ended up having to let go of, I think, about 20-25% of their workforce. And when I first saw this news, I thought, you know what? I bet you they're still stuck with a bunch of this inventory, and this is just like a little thing for them to get out of the mess that they found themselves in. And I've seen some reports of that. But I did look into it a little bit deeper and found out that they did actually get rid of all of their inventory last year in 2022. So that whatever losses they took from that terrible business decision a couple of years ago, they are completely out as of the end of 2022. So that's not what this is. And so I'm a little bummed. I was kind of going to jump on the conspiracy bandwagon, but look, at the end of the day, let's just talk about what it is, why they're doing it, and kind of my general thoughts on that. But number one, you're right. Right now it's limited to Arizona, but the plan is to expand that to other states. I think this is kind of their pilot program, but I think they're going to do that pretty quickly. And I thought maybe they'd already did, but I don't think they have. It's limited to first-time home buyers, so that's a limitation. 620 credit score, which isn't a huge number, so that should be something to go. But the big limitation on this, and it really is meant for, to Kathy's point earlier, sort of affordable housing, is that you're limited to people who have less than the median income in your particular area. So in order to qualify for this loan, you have to make 80% of the median income in your area. So I took my area just for shits and giggles, and I said,
I can't wait for this.
I live, obviously I live in beautiful San Clemente, which is a beach town, and it's a little bit of an affluent area, and the average median home here just dropped dramatically. Actually, it went from 1.8 million down to 1.4 million as the average, or the median home. But the median income is $51,000, right? And so 80% of $51,000 is $40,000. So in order for me to qualify to buy one of these homes, I'd have to make $40,000, which in order to buy an average home of 1.4 probably doesn't cut it. And even if I have a spouse and we double that number to 80 grand, still, I mean, for $80,000 or $60,000, obviously the house that I'm going to be looking to buy, looking at the debt to income ratio, is going to be well under whatever the median home price. So, at the end of the day, you just got to ask yourself, what is this for, right? Why are they doing this? And obviously it's you just follow the money always, right? So if you follow the money, you'll notice that Zillow has been really, not surprisingly, losing their shirt. because the transaction volume has plummeted. Like to Kathy's point there, the people aren't selling, the inventory is low, but the transactions are low. And we've talked a lot about that in the show over the last couple of weeks, that there really isn't much transaction. And because of that, Zillow's business model relies heavily on transaction volume. But for example, their mortgage revenue just dropped 17% year over year on their last quarterly review. So they're trying to increase that transaction volume. But what's really interesting, and this is where I really give Kyle bringing up the marketing thing, this isn't a new program, right? This program has been out there for other people. I mean, Rocket Mortgage has been using it. There's a company called Legacy. They've been using it. USDA Homes is using it. So these programs are already out there, and they're just marketing funnels where they're actually going to outsource the actual business of it. So this is not a new thing. But at the end of the day, look, we have a huge affordability problem in the US, right? Prices are just way too high relative to the incomes. And the solution for that is twofold. Either one, you put out more inventory, right? You increase the supply of homes, which is what Kathy's doing with her build to rents, or people who are doing mobile home park, anything that brings new affordable housing on the market. That should give some reprieve on the price side, or prices have to come down. Like that's it. Either prices have to come down or inventory has to come up. And the problem with these programs is that it reminds me of these exotic programs we had back in 07, 08. And I know, Kathy, you mentioned that, this is not a good comparison, but that's one of the things that did happen back in 07. You started getting all these exotic loan programs. Obviously, back then it was the adjustable rate mortgage and the negative, all that great stuff. And this starts to sound a little bit like that. But you're just artificially increasing. Look, I don't have a problem with it. This is a private business and private company. If they want to come up with this stuff, they're obviously making money from this program. This is not a goodwill, let me help poor people buy homes. This is a business decision, and they believe that they're going to make a lot of money from it. But, in terms of affordability, having people who otherwise wouldn't be able to get into a home, it creates an artificial demand, which again keeps these prices higher than they should be. And what really needs to happen is for either these prices to come down or for incomes to go up. And even if incomes do come up, I know my example's a little skewed, but I mean, incomes would have to come up dramatically vis-a-vis what the price of these homes are. So what really has to happen is prices need to come down. And that's what the Fed's trying to do with increasing these interest rates. And the mortgages are 7 or 8%. Prices need to come down. And this is not something that's going to make something more affordable. In fact, when you think about it, when people put less money down, their payments are higher. So at the end of the day, it's going to cost them more to get into their home. And maybe more importantly, their mortgage payments are going to be higher than if they'd put down 20% or 10%. So, there's a question of whether it's good or bad for the folks that are trying to get into their home. It's presumably a good business decision for Zillow if it works out. Again, is that really the business model that Zillow should be into?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Before this, did you know that Zillow did home loans?
No, I had no idea. But that's the point. Like this is
that's my point. That's the reason they're doing this. It has nothing to do with them making money on this. It is a marketing tactic. They want to say they've had Zillow home loans since 2018, and I had never heard of it.
Correct, but they do make money on every transaction. So they could literally lose money on this particular transaction. But remember, you've got real estate agents that are paying them, a monthly marketing fee to refer people.
They actually have a closing service as well,
and they have a closing service, and they're going to get a commission based on this addition. I mean, there's all these other revenue streams that even if they broke even or lost money, what they need to have happen, as well as all these other companies, they need transactions to go up. And at this point, transactions are stuck and the volumes are low because there's no inventory. Why would people leave their 2-3% mortgage? People can't afford them. Interest rates are going high. So this is a program to, at the end of the day, increase the transaction volume of real estate. Whether it's a good idea I don't think it helps the affordability part whatsoever. It's just a way for these companies to make more money, and more power to them. Just don't tell me you're trying to do good and do the affordability part when at the end of the day you're just trying to make some more extra money, which is fine. This is America and capitalism, and whatever you need to do to get the transaction volumes up, go knock yourself out. But it's not a new product. It's been around for a while. But to your point, Kyle, I think they're doing a really good job on the marketing, and Zillow's been in the news now for probably a couple of weeks, and I've heard more about Zillow than I have in the last year.
So I'm going to take a completely different tact on this, and
the wrong tact.
Probably, because I'm starting to feel this wine already. So if I'm slurring my words, I apologize. But taking off, when I first heard this, my first reaction wasn't as a real estate guy thinking, okay, 1% home loans. My first reaction was as a business and tech guy. because I come from that world, and I did a bunch of M&A and other stuff in the tech world. And my perspective on this is that this is basically a waving of the white flag for Zillow to anybody that knows what's going on. And the reason I say that is that Zillow has positioned themselves for the last decade as a tech company. And tech companies don't gain share price. They don't impress with their growth when they're making margins in the 7 to 10 to 12% range. And when you're doing home loans, that's essentially the business you're in. You're in a low margin, high volume business that's basically not putting your cash to work in ways that tech companies have historically put their cash to work. Tech companies make money by doing high volume, high margin businesses, by buying other businesses and increasing their balance sheet through acquisitions and mergers. And so it's kind of, I was at Microsoft back in 2001 when they had $100 billion in cash. And I remember literally the executives at Microsoft were going out to employees and saying, hey, what should we be doing with this cash? Like literally soliciting ideas. And the most common suggestion was we should be starting a bank, like a Microsoft bank. And basically the response was, that's ridiculous because we'd basically be putting this cash to work for 10, 15% returns, which isn't bad in the retail world. But for a tech company to tell your shareholders that they're going to get 10 to 15% returns on a significant amount of cash, that would have tanked the share price. So instead, they took a significant percentage of that $100 billion. And what did they do? They made a big distribution to investors, like $2 a share distribution to investors. They'd rather give it back to their investors than invest in a business that's only generating 15% margins. And so what I'm seeing with Zillow here, who has, I think, about $3-4 billion in cash, basically they're admitting that we have no better place for this cash than to be doing a relatively low margin business as a non-tech company.
But that low margin business is a little bit better than it used to be right now. Like margins are quite a bit higher. Like everyone wants to get into the lending business right now. Like the spreads are higher. The
tech businesses grow at 100%, 200%, 500% a year. And that's where their growth comes from. You have to justify the 10, 20, 30 times PE ratios, or sometimes infinite PE ratios, if you're going to be a tech company. And growing your company at 10 or 20% a year isn't going to justify that stock growth for a company like Zillow, who claims to be a tech company.
No, it's an interesting point. I was trying to figure out what percent. I didn't see that before. What percentage of their revenue comes from this mortgage? I mean, the revenues were down 20%, but I don't think it's it's a significant, but I don't know if it's the main. I mean, their main thing is still running ads on their platforms, getting referral fees to the agents that pay them. I mean, it's a multiple business model, but yeah, I mean, I know there's
just to put this into perspective, look at companies like Opendoor and Zillow that started their iBuyer program. And they lost hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in some cases, buying these houses that they renovated and tried to flip and lost money. What did their share price do while they were doing that? Their share price went through the roof because they were doing high transaction, high volume business. And what do shareholders care about? They care about top line. And so when you're selling a $400,000 house, that boosts your top line very quickly. Even if you're losing money on it, then it hurts your bottom line. But shareholders in tech companies don't care about bottom line. They care about top line. They want to know that you're making big moves. And so I actually thought the iBuyer program was smart on their part, even if they lost money. And it was. I mean, their share price went through the roof, and their management and executives all cashed out and made lots of money, and then screwed the rest of the investors. But what do
you think about Mauricio's thesis then, that it's not about actually boosting just the revenue of the loan portion of their company? It's okay, if we get enough people doing other transaction, it's boosting all the other parts of our company. Like they have,
because I'm looking at the P&L right now. I mean, their revenue of the mortgages is a pretty relative. It's a small percentage of their overall. Their main revenue is the agent, premier agent. This is all the fees that the real estate agents pay them on a monthly basis, just so that they're listed as their preferred agents. And then when somebody looked at a property on Zillow and they click and want to see it now, they're going to get referred to an agent. And that's a recurring revenue model. I saw somewhere it's $10,000 to $15,000 a month. And then, of course, once they get the deal, they split that commission as well. So that's the bulk. That's almost more than 50% of their revenue comes from that. They had some revenue from the rentals itself, but the mortgage segment seemed to be very 18 out of 435. So whatever that math looks
Right.
like.
And so the whole idea of the one-stop shop, right? Like you can show up at Zillow, you could find a house, you could find an agent, you could find someone who's going to do the loan for you. You could find somebody who's going to do the closing for you, and you're never going to have to go to any other site, and it's just going to bring in more people to the site. And that's, probably where they're talking about.
But it is a tech company. Like I thought the same thing, Jay. I mean, it is. I mean, again, their revenue is ad revenue and referral revenue. That's the two biggest sources of their revenue is ad and revenue. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to say you're wrong, Jay, because it's just not a big percentage of their revenue.
I mean, their share price is down, 70% over the last year. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think they lack a strategy that appeals to their desired shareholder.
But they're also a tech. Like to your point, to give you a little bit of credit, they are a tech company, and yet they're getting into all these businesses. They have no idea what to do with them. They think they can go compete with the Kathy Fetkes of the world to go buy single family homes and value add them and flip them and make a profit. But they're a tech company. They're a national tech, and they have no idea how to do that. What makes them think they're going to do much better in the mortgage business? Again, I think their primary bread and butter is the agents and the ads.
Well, back to the original topic a little bit, then I'll throw this at Kathy. Do you think this is actually helping home buyers, or do you think this is just self-serving?
Well, it's self-serving, obviously. They wouldn't be doing this unless they're planning on making it.
I asked Kathy.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said you were going to ask me and then throw it back to Kathy. Kathy Fettke, the floor is yours.
I'll go with Kyle. I'll say it's self-serving. I think the marketing point makes a lot of sense. They got some bad headlines on their failures, so they wanted, to get back in the limelight and look better, I guess.
They're playing it safe.
I mean, it's definitely look, the marketing is great. I think the byproduct, but I think the main impetus behind this is how, if you were Zillow, you got to figure out how do we get transaction volume higher right now, because transaction volume.
If they really cared, they could just lower spreads. Let's be honest. Like if they were. Like right now, the spreads are at 3% over the 10-year Treasury, and historically they're averaged at 1.75. If they really wanted to increase transaction value and transaction volume and get people to come in and use their loan product, lower that spread to 2. If you were 1% lower than everybody else,
I don't think they care necessarily about the loan product. They just want more buyers to buy and sellers to sell. Like how that happens, as long as that happens, that's how they're.
If interest rates all of a sudden dropped, there was a product that was a full 1% less. You don't think that would boost buyers and traffic to their site and people buying more and selling more?
It would be a different group of buyers. I mean, this is appealing to buyers who don't have the down payment. That would be appealing to buyers who are looking to.
Do we really want those people buying? Let's be honest. So if we're talking, what's the average home price? Just over 400,000 in America.
Yeah.
So 1% is $4,000. Do we really want somebody who can save $4,000 but can't save 12? Do we want those people out buying houses like financial?
I say yes. Yeah. I mean, to me, I've never cared about the down payment. It's the payment. If they can afford the payment, I don't care what they put down. The problem before was they couldn't afford the payment.
Can they afford the payment if they can't just, spend a little bit of time and save an extra $12,000? Like, I don't know. Like,
well, they're going to rent, a lot of people don't get credit for being good renters, for being consistent renters. That doesn't really go on their credit report. So the reason there were so many foreclosures in 2008 is the payment adjusted. They never qualified for that payment. So as long as they qualify and hopefully have, some reserves, I don't care about the down payment personally.
To me, it just shows financial savviness that $12,000 really isn't that much. I shouldn't say that. To some people who they can't even save $4,000, that's a lot of money. But I'm saying somebody who can save $4,000, which 5, 6, they're going to have to. It's never just going to be 1%. It's going to be a little bit more. If they can save that much, they can cut down their expenses by $500 a month and get there pretty quickly.
But I'd rather see them save that money. Like if you're going to have work hard to save $12,000, have that in your reserves. That's going to be more important.
Can I point out a couple things that I think are important distinctions here? Number one, this is a 3% down program. And so the borrower has to qualify for a regular 3% down conventional loan. It's just that Zillow is kicking in 2% of that 3%.
And the 2% just goes to closing costs too, right? It's not even like reducing their mortgage.
Yep. But then here's the more interesting thing, and I don't have any data here. I just have some anecdotal stuff that I find interesting. One of the qualifications or one of the requirements to qualify for this loan is that you have to take a course, basically. What do they call it? Let me see.
Financial literacy or something?
Yeah, like financial education.
Yeah, a home buyer education course. Now, there's this program out there that I actually was involved in a lot back in Atlanta when we were selling a lot of flip houses called NACA, neighborhood something, community something. But it was a nonprofit organization that basically helped people who couldn't otherwise qualify for loans get into houses 0% down. And this was back in 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And your first thought is probably those people probably lost their asses on those loans. No down payment, people that weren't qualified for housing, for mortgages, et cetera. The reality was to get into the program, you had to take many months worth of education, financial education. You had to volunteer for the program to help educate other people, et cetera, et cetera. Between 2008 and 2013, which was the last time I looked, the delinquency rate on those loans was less than 1%.
Wow.
Basically lower than any other loan product out on the market. And these were people who were unqualified to get a loan. They were just required to do basically give back in terms of volunteering their time and sitting through courses to teach them how to better manage their money. So education is something we shouldn't write off. And the fact that Zillow is requiring some education here, I don't have any hard data to support it, but that says to me that that's probably a good thing. And so I guess we'll see what the results are down the line.
Oh, we'll poll the audience here, or poll us as hosts. Do we think this is going to make it out of Arizona? What do you think, Jay?
I don't care. It pisses me off that they're making such a bad business move that I can't even think about it from the real estate side.
That's not an answer. It's a yes or no question.
Okay. Yes, it will.
Yes, you think so?
Yes, it will.
I think it will. But by the way, you guys were saying something about the 400K. Somebody did the math. I didn't do the math, but I can do it on the back of the napkin. You know, when you're Phoenix, for example, right? Phoenix, Arizona, the average median income is $32,000, right? So even if you say, a household is closer to 50, when you take that 80%, you're back to this $35,000 or $40,000. Those guys with the debt to income ratio and the interest rate, the mortgage rate, they're nowhere near buying a $400,000 house. We're still talking about buying.
But it's not them; it's Californians, and we're the ones buying those houses.
But even in Phoenix, which supposedly
that's what I'm saying. In Phoenix, Californians moving there. That's 400,000 nothing.
Yeah. So, this is literally at the lower end. Like, this is like you're buying the lower end of the marketplace. And I don't know. I do think it's going to get out of Phoenix. I think they're going to make money, and we're still going to see a market correction, and it's going to be that.
Fair enough.
All right, Kyle. What silly games do you have for us today, Kyle?
Well, no. So we did the Zillow. So we just talked a lot about Zillow, and for the top 10, it just so happens that Zillow actually has 10 businesses. So there's the Zillow Group is their big conglomerate, or if you look at something like Google, they have Alphabet, and Google's just one of their companies. So Zillow actually has 10 businesses. So I'll start listing some, and I'll see if any of you guys can finish off the end one. So obviously there's just Zillow, as you traditionally think about, but they actually went out and they bought a bunch of smaller Zillows. So the biggest one that everyone knew was they bought Trulia, which was, I don't know, it was like 2.4 billion or something like that. But then they also bought a company called Out East, which is a listing service in the Hamptons that still was running. They did a Street Easy, which is a New York City listing service. And then another one that many people would have heard of, it would be Hot Pads. So they own all those, and they still run those. But then some others that you may not have heard of is they have Zillow Homes, which is they're actually a licensed broker in some states. So they make money off of that. To Mauricio's point, they have their fingers in the pie more than just one way. They have a Zillow closing services, which provides you, as it says, closing services for transaction. They have Zillow home loans, Zillow Premier Agent Services, as we talked about.
Is there at some point do we get to guess here, or are you just going to?
And then I'm leaving the last one. Guess what the last one is?
I thought didn't they buy like 5 years ago a company, we used them, and that's the reason I know that does like keyless entry.
I don't know about that, but my point was going to be they still own Zillow Offers and operate Zillow Offers, which is the company that they bought all those flips to do, and they still operate that now. Obviously, not to the scale of what they were doing before, but that is still part of their company. So to say that they're learning their lesson on this new one, I don't know if that's a good bet. All right, should we move on to a question and answer game?
I want to know. I want to know if Mauricio has had General Tso's chicken yet.
I'm glad you guys sent me a picture of that, because I still to this point probably couldn't pick it out of a lineup.
Kathy, we had an episode last week. The top 10 was most popular Asian or maybe Chinese food dishes. And number 1 was General Tso's chicken. And Mauricio claimed he had never heard of it.
I don't think I have either.
Really? Well, Kathy hasn't heard of General Tso's chicken either?
Maybe it's a California thing, Kathy.
I don't know. Maybe
it's a West Coast thing.
Wow. Okay. I then maybe I owe you guys an apology.
Thanks, Kathy.
Wow, we found the one person who would back you up. Congratulations.
I got you.
All right. So I'm going to go with the questions that people have asked. So dumb little questions. So the first one is, should you share a toothbrush with your spouse, or is that completely gross?
Oh, my dad was a dentist and he would not approve.
Kathy's not a dentist. Does Kathy approve?
I mean, if you're traveling and you forgot your toothbrush and you just sort of like wash it with soap afterwards so they don't notice that you borrowed it, maybe it's okay, but it's still gross.
I used to wet Carol's toothbrush just so she thought I did, because it would really gross her out. I'd have no problem with it.
It's like the one thing that like freaks Ashley out. She would never do it, and so I always give her shit. Be like, "Oh, I forgot my toothbrush. I'm going to use yours," and she loses her mind.
In a pinch, I have no problem.
Here's a little insight into my world. So if you use a spoon to stir your coffee and put the spoon down, I will not use it. And if you use a butter knife to butter your bread or whatever, and you leave the thing, I will not use it. So toothpaste.
That hasn't even been in anyone's mouth.
What's your rationale?
It's just I don't know. There's something that I'm like ODC about it, or whatever the term is. And so toothbrushes, are you kidding me?
OCD. Close enough. He's been getting those distribution notices from Open Door Capital.
Actually, Open Door Capital is the sponsor of the show, so I just want to get through in there.
No affiliation. So Jay, are you on board or not on board?
I have no issue using Carol's toothbrush.
I completely agree. It's like, I don't know. I don't see the big deal about it, but apparently it's something that
I'm not going to choose to share it, but if I forget mine, no issue whatsoever.
Oh, disgusting.
All right, Kathy, since you're the guest of the day, why don't you plug something for us?
Oh my goodness, plug something. Well, I'm going to do a women's mastermind on helping them get on more stages. I'm super stoked on it because I mean, you guys, I'm so often the only woman on the stage, and as we know, Ashley wrote a book called The Only Woman in the Room, and I appreciate that. And so I just thought, with my broadcast background, I'm going to have like 12 women and bring in all the coaches that I've worked with and get more women on stages, on podcasts. I'm stoked.
That is a great idea.
For those who don't know, I don't know if this is where you made your name, but I certainly associate this with where you made your name. Kathy was on Fox News back in 2007 as one of the few people that was willing to predict an impending recession. Is that correct?
Well, I worked in the broadcast industry in the news business before real estate. I think the interview that I got the most attention for was on Fox. I think it was 2012, actually, when I debated Robert Shiller of the Case-Shiller Index. And he had never done a debate, didn't want to do one, but And he's like, oh, some female out in California I've never heard of. So he agreed, and I totally killed it. I won that debate.
Oh, I need to look that up.
That's great. And Jay, notice I put her on the spot there and she automatically came up with something. And yet, this is coming every week. I ask you, what's your plug? And you're always like, oh, I don't know. Maybe we'll do this. So what do you got this week?
I don't know. Go subscribe, smash that subscribe button on
See,
YouTube.
you still got nothing.
By the time this comes out, which is 12 hours from now, we may have a new deal in the hopper. So I'm not going to announce that yet, but
oh my God, why would you say that? Don't jinx it. Like nothing's signed.
It's close.
Mauricio, you got anything to plug?
I usually plug, and I'm not going to plug my Real Estate Syndicate Alive at Wednesdays at 4:30 right now. But if you want to go see that, you can go on YouTube. But I think I'm going to plug. And I'm not going to plug the fact that I'm on LinkedIn all the time. So if you're looking for some great content, just follow me at LinkedIn. So I don't think I'm going to plug anything today.
Perfect. Well, once again, I'm plugging my wife tonight. Go follow her on Instagram, Badass Investor, and YouTube. Check out her shorts. I did some taping for her today. Got to stand there and just stay quiet, push the button while she talks at a camera. So that was entertaining.
When you plug Ashley, does she wear the shorts?
I was just going to say 20 years ago, if someone said, hey, check out her shorts, you'd be like, oh, they're so cute. Yeah. So it's just life has changed.
No, that's she works hard at those shorts. It's like a big thing. We got to set up the whole lighting, and she doesn't want to get out of her seat because she gets perfectly situated of this is where I'm going to sit. So I got to stand back there and hit.
By the way, if you haven't commented yet, Kyle just moved his hat a little bit.
Yeah, there we go. I just
there it is.
Just
the time right
there. There it is.
To note it.
Yep.
Okay, we're a minute 16 in, and we're at the very end. Anybody still listening, I will give away a book to the first person who comments on YouTube.
But fast forward to an hour and 16, not a minute 16, as Jay just said.
Did I say a minute? Sorry, I'm a little drunk.
Yep. All right. Well, I don't know about you guys, but my drink is gone. I think I'm going to go hit the head. Special thanks to Kathy for joining us this week.
Thank you,
Hopefully she'll come back again.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Little
Kathy.
finger claps.
AJ out of here.
And for the rest of you, I will see you next Tuesday.
Later.
Bye-bye.